We have a quorum. Let's wait a moment longer.
Commissioner Del Rosario.
Right, he was completely late.
That he'll be arriving late. So we can get started when they're ready.
Let's go ahead and get things started. Freed, can you start us off with the roll call?
Commissioner Jovendell.
Present.
Vice Chair Graham.
Here.
Chair McCroskey.
Here.
Commissioner Del Rosario is currently absent.
Okay, we'll expect him along the way. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lejeune. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. With that, I'd like to move on to public comment. This is a chance for members of the public to make comment on things that are not otherwise on the agenda. And to do that, you would use the raise hand feature. And I see we already have at least one.
Jeremiah, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My public comment, I want to talk a couple things here. First of all, I want to mention the school zones. I just want to say thank you for considering the school zones, and I hope it makes it on the agenda sometime soon. Please. So over in the Sprouts Starbucks Plaza area, there's no crosswalks or crosswalk signs. There's kind of a makeshift crosswalk, but it's not really striped very well. And there's no pedestrian crossing sign. And it's really dangerous right there. I think a little paint and a little fluorescent sign for $125. I think it's worth spending that money to save someone's life. People are rushing, driving. You got people parking and walking across the street to get Starbucks in the morning. It's just really dangerous area, that's all. Right there on 10th and Monroe. I wish that was a four-way stop. We got a whole bus depot, an AC transit transfer station, and there's no stop sign right there. And we got a senior citizen home. You got big buses, senior citizens walking around, getting lost, might not even know where they're at. And there's no stop sign. And I've witnessed buses, even myself, driving, and you see that green light up there on San Pablo. You just want to drive straight through. I think a speed bump or at least a crosswalk sign or stop sign right there, something's got to be improved for safety because it's not safe. And we've got too many people walking around right there. You got the village, you got kids, baseball games. So can you please make 10th and Monroe and Sprouts Plaza safer, please? And also Solano, thank you for reducing the speed limit on Solano. I see the suggested signs, and I'm looking forward for the real signs. Thank you. Keep up the good work, everybody.
Mr. Chair, I don't see any other.
Great. So we'll bring it back to the commission. I will just say thank you, Mr. Pingal, for your suggestions of future agenda items. I will say again that the Sprouts area is not currently under the purview of the city of Albany, and we cannot make changes there. And I suggest that you contact the University of California and pursue your interest there. We won't be agendizing that because we cannot make those changes ourselves. With that, let's move along to item number 3, our presentations.
Thank you, Chair McCroskey. I'll be reporting this evening on the month of February's collision data. There were 0 pedestrian and automobile collisions. There were 4 bicycle collisions in the month of February. There were 11 vehicle collisions, 6 of which were injury collisions. 22 moving citations were issued, and 3 DUI arrests were made. That concludes my report of the police data.
Great. Unless commissioners object, I'm inclined to combine comments and questions of this along with the shared mobility data, if we have it this month. So, Mr. Freed, if you would proceed.
Sure. We do have shared mobility data from GIG this month, so I'll be reporting on November, December, and January data. The active members were approximately 220 and 230s through those 3 months. And trip starts were in the range of 478 in November up to 535 in January and 560 in December, and then 560 in January. And I did talk with staff from GIG. They're shifting to wanting to meet more quarterly, but also automate the data production a little bit. They communicated that they've seen a bit of a market demand shift toward more multi-day trips, and they've adjusted their pricing and program a bit to accommodate that. So that may be part of the influence of fewer trips, but still having active members. They have added 150 new cars to the fleet and have about 550 vehicles now operating in the region. They've also instituted pilot areas in San Francisco and Bernal, Richmond, and Sunset. And they've been working to provide some concentrated corridors in South Oakland, where instead of having the whole area having particular corridors that you can expect to find the vehicles and that you have to return them to. So they've adjusted how they've been doing programming both in San Francisco and in Oakland. And they also communicated that they're talking to El Cerrito, so they are exploring expanding to the north. That's the information from GIG. I don't have a lot to report on electric scooters, but we have heard from Berkeley colleagues that they're expecting to launch scooters very soon. Haven't heard yet from any companies interested in extending their operation to Albany yet, but still expect to hear that. That concludes my report.
Great. I'm sorry I missed whatever promotion they were hosting in October. Looks like they must have been doing something. Any commissioner questions on the data from the 2 sets that we've seen? Seeing none, we'll open it up to public comment. Looks like we have at least one. We'll go up to 3 minutes.
Jeremiah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to say that I was on the freeway and I saw a gig in a car accident. It was actually in Albany on the freeway. It was just outside the Buchanan exit. This was like last week. And when I saw it, I was actually thinking about this data. I really seriously thought about this meeting and the gig graph results. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, this probably might not make the data because it was on the freeway, even though it's in Albany. But anyway, yeah, it was kind of sad to see because the car was totaled. But I was wondering about safety. Are these gig cars, have they chosen a safe vehicle, such as airbags, side airbags, driver and passenger, and also in the back seat, are there airbags somehow for the back seat? And then I was thinking about gigs. Let's say you're driving with a child and you're using a car seat. I was hoping the gigs, are all fitted for car seats. And then I was going to say about the gigs, I was looking forward for possibly electric cars someday or electric gigs. And when they do have the electric gigs, where are we going to park those in Albany to charge them? So maybe we could find somewhere in Albany, like the community center or the city hall, somewhere, and we could get at least one or two car charging stations. Maybe in the Safeway parking lot up on Solano, maybe we can install some car chargers up there, or somewhere else. But I think that we'd have to do electric car charging stations and gig in collaboration. That'd be really nice to see someday. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission for comments. Seeing none, I'll just respond a little bit to the public comment and say that, the cars that they're using are modern cars that have airbags in the regulated places. It's a little beyond our community's ability to tell gig what they should use. We can certainly comment, but it's a big program that goes far beyond the scope of Albany. It's sad to see any car in a wreck, but that's going to happen eventually with any car on the road, any type of car, any car service. And all modern cars have the special clips hidden under the seat for the modern straps with clips on the end that make it very easy and very secure to put in car seats. So I'm not worried about that. If there's no other comment on that, I think we can complete this. Thank you for those. Let's move on to item number 4, our consent calendar, with the single item, the minutes from our last meeting. Does anybody have any reason to pull the minutes from the consent calendar? I guess we'll see if audience has or our attendees have any comments on the minutes. 1 minute to if you have a comment or question to the minutes. I'm not seeing any hands. Perhaps a commissioner then can give us a motion.
I'll move approval of the minutes.
I'll second.
Great. We have a motion and a second. Good thing there are 3 of us. And if there's any further discussion, not seeing any, Mr. Freed, will you please take a roll vote?
Commissioner Javendal,
Aye.
Vice Chair Graham,
Yes.
Chair McCloskey.
Yes.
Motion carries.
I want to pause for a moment. I don't think we've made it clear that we currently have an opening on the commission and that there are only 4 total commissioners. And this is a good time early in the meeting to give a plug. If anybody's interested in joining us on the commission, you can go to the albanyca.org website and apply to be a commissioner for this or any of the other commissions and committees. And we encourage you to do so. The commissioner position that's open was Ben Fong, and he was an appointee of Janelle Geary. And if you submit through the city system, as she's making her selection, she will see your information. And you can also contact her directly. Thank you. With that, let's see, did we vote? Great, just making sure. Let's move on to our discussion items. And our first item is the local road safety plan goals and objectives.
Thank you, Chair McCroskey. I'd like to introduce Corey Peterson, who's a senior transportation planner with TJKM, who's the project manager for this planning effort, and he'll be presenting this item.
Perfect. Let me get my screen shared. All right, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Good evening, everyone. It's really great to be here, and thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be presenting to you on your local roadway safety plan. I'm excited to get going on this project and to work with you all. First, I'd like to, just to break the agenda and what I'd like to talk about, and I know we are going to talk about the goals and objectives, but I did want to kind of tee it up a little bit. Talk a little about what an LRSP is and the process for those that may not be aware. We'll talk about our scope and schedule for the project. We'll dive into the goals and objectives. And I'd like to show you guys the project website that we put together and an interactive map input tool that we're going to use to garner input from the community. So first, just quickly on what a local roadway safety plan is. Really, the overarching goal of an LRSP is to reduce fatalities and severe injury traffic collisions on city roadways. And the way we do that is we identify traffic collisions that have occurred, we analyze the trends, and then we prioritize roadway and intersection safety improvements. This is specifically for city roads. So we don't really focus on freeways. We focus on Albany's own streets and to recommend safety improvements that, again, that could be applied for various grant funding programs, but most prominently the HSIP program, which is the Highway Safety Improvement Program. That's a grant fund source from Caltrans, and an LRSP is required to be able to apply for those funds starting this spring. We do consider engineering and non-engineering strategies. So in addition to engineering programs, engineering projects, we also look at it in educational programs, enforcement, how we incorporate equity, and then emergency response to collisions. The process to develop an LRSP. So the first thing we do is we gather 5 years worth of collision data on city roadways. In this case, we are including San Pablo Avenue, even though it is a Caltrans owned street. We are including it in the analysis since it is basically your main street. We don't include other state highways such as I-80 and 580 because really the purpose is to focus more on collisions that are happening on your local roads. We then take that and identify what types of trends are happening. So we'll look at the types of collisions. Was it a broadside or like a right-angle collision, or did somebody hit a fixed object? We look at the severity, anywhere from property damage only up to a fatality. Violation categories: was it caused by speeding, a DUI, or a pedestrian violation? And then we also look at lighting as well, because in a lot of cases, lighting may be a factor. There's a lot of collisions happening at night. From there, we identify some of the top trends that are occurring within Albany, and then do a spatial analysis as well to figure out where those types of collisions are occurring. From this, we identify what's called a high injury network. So this is a list of intersections and mid-block roadway segments where there's a lot more severe collisions occurring. It may not necessarily be the place where there's the most collisions, but there where the most severe injury collisions are occurring. And then from there, we identify emphasis areas, which is where we start to get into the recommendations from the project. Emphasis areas are either types of collisions or violation categories, or even human behaviors that we want to address through the LRSP process. And this is where the E strategies come in. So for each emphasis area, we'll recommend E strategies, beyond just engineering, but also the other E's that I mentioned. We'll look at education and enforcement and so on. From there, we identify engineering countermeasures and develop a toolbox that the city can use to identify, to either apply for grant funding or even incorporate some of the recommendations into future city projects like the CIP, or if you guys have a paving schedule, you want to incorporate some minor sighting and striping improvements. This is a good way to do that. The last thing is we develop safety projects, and these are combinations of engineering countermeasures specifically for the high risk or high injury locations across the city. And this is kind of typically where cities can then take those to apply for the HSIP grant as well. So here's our scope of work in brief. Our first task is really to identify and engage the stakeholders. So we are going to have a virtual stakeholder meeting, and this is really more geared towards agency staff and other associated agencies that would be involved in the 5Es process. So the police department, fire department, school district, transit agency, and really just kind of pick their brain and present some of the findings of the project and get an understanding of what concerns they have regarding traffic safety. What are they, what are their experiences, in their jobs and working, in their, what they're seeing out on the streets, basically. But we are going to supplement this with the project website, the interactive map tool, which I'll get into a little bit later, but that will be our primary method to outreach to the greater Albany community. Task 2 is doing data collection and review. So this will include the collision analysis and developing the high injury network that I mentioned, and then proposed countermeasures, where we start to get into the recommendations portion of the project, identifying emphasis areas, the countermeasure toolbox, and the safety projects, and then finally the development of the final document. Here's our schedule for the project. So we just kicked it off about a week or two ago, and we'll be getting to our first major deliverable in the end of April. We're anticipating that we'll be wrapping up this project sometime in the fall. So we'll be kind of getting into the countermeasures around the summertime, and then late summer we'll get into developing the final reports as well. Okay, so now that the interest stuff is over, let's talk about the goals and objectives. So we put together a set of 5 goals, and these have been presented to city staff. They've given us their comments, and we've incorporated them. So these are the 5 goals that we recommended. And I'm going to go, actually, instead of going through each of them here, I'm going to go through each goal separately and talk about the specific objectives. I know that this is a lot of text, but bear with me. I'll kind of summarize it as we go along. So the first goal is really getting at the heart of what an LRSP does, which is to identify and analyze roadway safety problems, and then recommend, ways to combat them or ways to improve those particular problems that we're identifying. Again, this could be crash types, violation types, whatever is the most prominent trends. This is what we want to find out and then address through the LRSP process. So the first objective is using the systemic safety analysis method, which is where we identify traffic collisions, focus specifically on fatal and severe injury, where and when and how they are occurring, and then we implement appropriate improving countermeasures through the E strategies. Objective 2, to improve roadway planning and design, really to enhance safety and mobility and for all modes and users of all ages and abilities. Objective 3 refers to traffic calming strategies and discouraging speeding. On 4, ensuring that all recommended improvements are consistent with your planning goals, as well as any state and federal regulations or goals. And then number 5, reviewing your existing policies and making sure that they're meeting best practices in the realm of traffic safety. The second goal kind of focuses more on pedestrian, bicyclists, and transit riders. So we really want to make sure that we're specifically addressing the needs of these groups because they're among the most vulnerable road users out there. So we want to make sure that we're providing effective countermeasures that can help address safety issues specifically related to pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit riders. So the first objective will be to identify the safety issues for these groups, and then also specifically looking at transit riders, looking around AC transit stops, school routes, and other destinations, and then making sure we're recommending appropriate engineering countermeasures to help address those safety issues. Objective 2, looking at educational programs for bikes and peds and motorists to inform them on how to be safe around pedestrians and bicyclists. And that also could be through safe routes to school as well, which is listed down as objective 4 as well. And then also ensuring that sidewalks and walkways are free of hazards and minimize conflicts with vehicular traffic. So goal number 3 really focuses on kind of bringing together all the key stakeholders to ensure that there's a coordinated response to traffic collisions or traffic safety issues. Like the LRSP really recognizes that, doing each of the E's, educating the public, building, engineering projects or enforcing traffic laws, it works better when it's done, together. It's doing one by itself is not as effective as when we do, when we kind of bring them together and have a coordinated response. And that's really what goal 3 gets at. So the first objective is really to kind of bring together all the city departments and other agencies to ensure a coordinated response. And then objective 2, bringing in other local and regional state partners, such as the CTC, AC Transit, or Caltrans, to identify and address traffic safety issues. Goal number 4, really to continually seek funding for safety improvements. So this, refers to like going after grants and making sure that the city is continuously, being on the lookout for grant opportunities and funding that can help to implement a lot of the recommendations from the LRSP. So the first being ensuring that it meets the HSIP guidelines so that you are able to apply for the funds starting in the next cycle, which will be coming out in this spring. Objective 2, we're to look at identifying a list of prioritized locations. Again, that refers back to the high injury network, and then recommending improvements that can guide the city's investments and any future grant funding applications. Identifying and specific types of countermeasures that can be implemented systemically across the city, maybe not necessarily at specific locations. So this could be, kind of low cost countermeasures like signing and striping, rectangular rapid flashing beacons, things that can be pretty easily and quickly implemented at many locations across the city. And then also number 4 is to really continue to seek funding sources for all the different E strategies, not just engineering, but also funding to implement educational programs or enforcement, really just all the E's, making sure that we're not just focusing on engineering solutions. Excuse me. And then lastly, goal number 5 gets at making sure that, the recommendations that we're making are done in a way that's equitable, and ensuring that, when safety improvements are made, that the community is informed and given a chance to respond and give their comments. Also providing them a forum to submit traffic safety concerns, and then ensuring that when safety improvements are made, that we are doing in a way that's equitable, that we're doing in a way that, kind of, I guess, spreads the wealth, that we're making sure there's improvements in all parts of town, and that we're doing it, based on data that says, this is where we're seeing a lot of traffic collisions and we need to do something about it. So like I mentioned, we've put together a project website for the local roadway safety plan, and I'll be kind of going through that in a little bit, but I think the most powerful tool of the website is the interactive map tool, where residents and stakeholders can go onto the website and click on the report your concern button. It'll take you to a map that allows you to pin a line and point onto the map and describe your concern. what I'd like to do is actually give you a quick demo. So here's the website. First, I'll kind of go through that. It starts out with kind of an overview of the project, explains what an LRSP is, shows a map of the project area, which of course is the city of Albany's city limits. When you scroll down, you can hit the report your concern button to go to specifically to the Maptionary, the interactive map tool. We also have provided a map of collisions within the city. So you can actually zoom in on a particular spot, click on a collision, and it'll give you information about the collision. And then if you click on this bar up here in the top right, it'll also give you a legend for the coloring of the collision, what the severity of the collision was. Here we'll post any project updates that are pertinent as the project goes on. And then also gives a place to provide additional feedback through the messaging service, and then subscribe to the website as well. Well, let me get into the interactive map tool. So when you click on the interactive map tool on the report your concern button, this is the splash screen that'll pop up. So you can click on the right arrow here. It'll take you to that map. You can actually zoom in at the location that you have a concern at. Let's say that you frequently walk through along Solano Avenue and are trying to cross San Pablo, and you maybe almost get hit by a car, or you see a lot of cars speeding. You can actually drop a point and then type in your related concern. So let's say speeding cars, and then you hit done. And you can do that as many times as you want until you've relayed all of your concerns. You can also draw a line if you want to denote an entire corridor. Again, we'll use Solano Avenue as an example. So let's say you want to look at the corridor from Key Route Boulevard up to Santa Fe. You can double click and again, type your concern. Let's say again, speeding cars. And then you hit done. Then you go through the process, enter all your locations, and then you can click yes to continue and enter in your contact info would you like to be updated on the project or exit the survey. Another powerful thing about this tool is really what the purpose is to get input from the community where maybe there's near misses or collisions, things that we're not seeing in the collision data. We can use this to supplement our understanding of the data in our recommendations to make sure that it meets the community's needs, but also we can kind of use this to understand people's perception of safety and understand if they feel unsafe walking in an area or they have specific concerns in that regard. That we can also see that through this tool. All right. With that concludes my presentation, and I would like to open up for any questions or comments, and I will be taking copious notes. So if I look away from the screen, I promise I'm still listening. I'm just writing a lot of stuff down. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Commissioner, questions? Commissioner Del Rosario, and welcome this evening. I don't know if you've heard, but we're down one commissioner. Commissioner Fong has left us. Just want to make sure you're aware of that, and good to have you here. So we're at full current strength.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm aware, and sorry I'm late. But thanks for the presentation. I think I caught most of it. My question was, I'm glad that equity will be used as a criteria when selecting where to implement safety improvements. I know that we're sort of in the early starts of equity goals for the city, but do you know how you will roll or include equity in your process?
Mm. So I think there's a couple ways that we're looking to do that, and I think that this is something that maybe that Justin and I will also kind of discuss and hammer out a little bit. But I think a couple things that come to mind that we'll do is, by its nature, an LRSP is a very data-driven plan. So, we're basically, we definitely take, public inputs into account, and we, wanted to make sure that what we're recommending makes sense for the community, that the community, it will meet their needs and they'll accept it. But at the same time, the data is what the data is. And so, definitely be looking at, relying on the data as well as public input to make sure that, where there's collisions occurring, wherever they occur, that we're, making sure that we're recommending safety improvements in those locations. Another thing that we can do is also kind of take a look at, from a demographic standpoint or from, income data or anything from the census, we can kind of overlay that on collision data to see, what actually measure the impacts of, traffic collisions and where they're occurring within the city. And I think those two things will kind of inform how we can make recommendations towards the end of the plan. But really the purpose is to make sure that it's done in a way where we're not concentrating things in one area, that we're spreading it out, making sure that, we're kind of striking a balance between the data and, and public input as well. Now, that being said, public input is also extremely important because that'll also help us identify locations that maybe the data is not telling us, but there are legitimate safety concerns as well, because, maybe there are collisions in one intersection that has certain characteristics, but there are 5 other intersections that have similar characteristics in terms of, the geometry, the amount of traffic volumes or pedestrians or, whatever it may be. And then we can use that, public input to help kind of supplement that. So I think that's something that Justin and I will kind of work through as the project goes on. But those are a couple initial thoughts that I had. And I appreciate, actually, Justin forwarded me your email that he sent you earlier. So I appreciate your comments and kind of had some time to think about it.
Right. Yeah, just as a follow-up, I think the city, another leg of the city, has some focus on equity and possibly establishing some principles or goals. Maybe staff might be able to chime in, and I guess we should try to be consistent with that in this process.
Sure, absolutely.
Great. Other commissioner questions? Seeing none, I have to be careful here not to go on to opinions before we get public comment. But Mr. Peterson, during the selection process and in our creation of our RFP, we kind of pushed the program a little bit in terms of trying to include not just positive data but negative data. And the public input certainly can help with that in terms of, where are people scared to walk or uncomfortable walking so that there aren't accidents because people just aren't there, or where aren't they biking? And I guess I would love to see your ideas about how you might publicize that as part of the process and prioritize that. And then, it sounds like there are a number of different criteria here. We've got equity, we've got the high injury network. I would also throw in connectivity, both inside of Albany and to the surrounding communities. Albany is kind of a crossroads. Maybe these are criteria that could be highlighted and scored separately to give visibility to these issues in the end. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I understand it's data driven, but I'd like to try and push the scope to include things that don't show up in the data. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually something that we've experienced before in other LRSP projects is, like I said, the data is what the data is, but at the same time, we also need to be cognizant of the fact that there are locations that, either the city itself or the community has a lot of concerns about, and those need to be addressed more robustly as well. So, if there's locations where we're seeing a lot of public comments where they're scared to walk there, there's safety concerns there, and I think people just aren't there because of that. then that's something that we might be able to add on to the list of locations as well, if there's, you know, legitimate safety concerns and that the community expresses. So yeah, as we kind of start to see public input come in on this, we'll kind of start to evaluate and see what we're seeing in terms of the types of comments and the locations, and then we can evaluate from there. In terms of publicizing it, typically what we've done in the past is social media is usually a big driver behind it. So we usually will have the city post on their social media pages. If you guys have like a city council newsletter or anything that kind of goes out to the community from the city itself, that's usually another great way to do it. Community organizations can, you know, reshare Facebook posts, police, fire, you know, as many pages they can get on, the better, because then the more people will see it. That's typically how I've done it in the past.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
I guess I was just looking for more explicit framing in terms of, you know, asking the question, where do you fear to walk or bike?
Okay.
Let us know, you know where you don't go because you feel uncomfortable.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
And I don't see that currently in the communications materials or the website.
Okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I think maybe that's something we can figure out how to frame and put into the tool, and kind of maybe give some promptings when, you know, people put in their concerns. We can put in some promptings about, no, obviously not like, you know, trying to bias them, basically like ask the question like, you know, what are your concerns? Where do you feel unsafe? It's, you know, we can kind of put in those promptings in the tool itself. That's totally doable. So maybe Justin, we can kind of talk that over and see if there's some language you can put in there in the tool itself that will kind of prompt people to think about that question. Where do you feel unsafe, or where do you just don't go because you feel unsafe walking or biking? Yeah, I think that would be acceptable. We could do that.
Yeah, we can send to the commissioners the draft website and tool. If you have specific feedback, it's still draft. We haven't made it live yet, so we have some time.
Great.
Right.
Thank you for that response. I'm lapsing into opinions. If there are no further commissioner questions, we should do a public comment. I'm not seeing commissioner questions, and we have 2 hands up. So let's take it to public comment at up to 3 minutes each.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jeremiah, please go ahead.
All right. So, you know, I feel safe riding a bicycle in a bike lane. You know, I feel safe riding a bike along the Ohlone Greenway. I don't feel safe riding a bike on a street next to cars if there's no bike lane. I don't feel safe riding my bike across any street intersection that doesn't have a bike lane. If I didn't get off my bike and look both ways and cross the street and walk my bike across the street. So, I mean, I feel safe riding my bike in bike lanes and on the Ohlone Greenway, but I don't feel safe riding my bike on any street without a designated, I don't feel safe riding my bike on any street without a designated bike lane next to cars. You know, and the thing that I notice a lot around Albany is I'm not sure where the education is failing, but I see so many kids with their parents and they're literally riding their bike across the street, across the crosswalk. And I'm like, what is going on? I mean, I learned to walk your bike across the street. Get off your bike and walk and look both ways and walk your bike across the street in the crosswalk. That's how I was born and raised. But so it's education. We got to teach grown people, grown adults that have kids how to properly cross the street. Because I don't see a lot of education on how to properly cross a street on a bicycle. And another thing is around our schools, we got to make it safer because overall traffic is way too fast, the speed of traffic. The only thing we can implement is speed bumps, and that'll slow cars down. And signage. We need high visibility signs. We need signs to instruct drivers to do something. I mean, we actually need a stop sign at an intersection to tell people to stop. If there was no stop sign, people would just drive right through the intersection. So that's how it goes to show how important signs are. I wish every single crosswalk on Solano had a push button LED crosswalk, or every crosswalk on at least Marin. And I just want to say one more thing, is that AC Transit drives way too fast up and down Solano, and I'm serious about that.
All right. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you for your time.
Next, Ed Fields, please go ahead.
Good evening. I had two quick question/comments. On the slide where you showed collision data, that's going to be on the site, I guess, and you had the different colored dots, the red and the orange. I couldn't see because you went fairly quickly. You showed the severity, I think, of the injuries, but I couldn't tell if you showed clearly whether it was car versus car, car versus pedestrian, car versus bicyclist. That's one of the things that I would be looking for. And the second thing, when you talk about stakeholders, I think the citizens of Albany are the number one stakeholder here. And somehow we got shoved down to the bottom of the list. And, well, we'll make a website for you. And if you're lucky, there'll be a city newsletter that most people won't read, but it'll point to the website. So I think engagement with the public is pretty important. I've often asked why I can't see how many people are participating in the Zoom webinar. Sometimes I think it's my fault. I'm not clicking in the right place. There are two of us asking questions. Are there 5 people watching this meeting or 50 people? So public participation, I think, is pretty important in anything that the city does. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further questioners, we'll bring it back to the commission and the consultants. Thank you for those comments. Commissioners, comments, opinions? Commissioner Javedal.
I just wanted to follow up on the concept of places that people are uncomfortable or afraid to go, because it's going to be either places that the data shows are unsafe and their fears are borne out by the data, or it's places that are functionally barriers. They don't go, and therefore there's low exposure and the data does not show severe crashes. So it's basically either they recognize areas that have a high risk and a high number of collisions, or they recognize an area that serves as a barrier. And the reason I kind of raised that distinction is we kind of have a finite amount of capacity to do things. And if we want to prioritize, we ought to be clear whether we are putting in countermeasures to reduce a pattern of collisions that are happening or to remove barriers to improve mobility. Because they're kind of two different things. There are locations that if people were there would be quite unsafe. Obviously, to use an unrealistic extreme, pedestrians on the freeway. You just don't want them going there. But it makes it really hard for them to get from, town to the shore if we didn't have the racetrack in the way. That a freeway is typically a big barrier, and maybe it's an acceptable barrier. Railroad tracks, similarly, are barriers. Not to say that we shouldn't remove barriers, because there are many in town that a busy street is a barrier. There's no question about that. And we probably want to identify that as a concern, that a lot of people don't feel comfortable walking across San Pablo at an uncontrolled intersection. That intersection may or may not have a high number of collisions versus an intersection that's not so frightening but has a high number of collisions. And I think we just need to be careful that we don't put them on the same scale.
That's a great teasing out of the details. I think that's definitely important. I have to say, I think my own bias was that my feel is that overall in Albany, we don't have that many collisions, but we do have them. So let's be clear about the distinction.
Yeah, I would love to say that the areas with a high rate of collisions are low enough that we can deal with all of them and have capacity to go the next step. And then that next step should absolutely be tackle those barriers, tackle those areas that people are afraid to go because it feels unsafe. You bet. But I think, I hope that's the case.
Right. So it's really a difference in barriers. I mean, you're talking about a no-go barrier versus a reinforced perception of danger barrier.
Right.
That where people do go.
Mental barrier rather
dangerous.
than a physical barrier, but that mental barrier is in response to a real situation.
Yes. Great. Other commissioners. Commissioner Del Rosario.
Thanks. And I did submit some comments in writing to staff because I wasn't available. Oh, did Commissioner Graham have her virtual hand up? Sure. All right. Sorry about that. So I'm not sure what the scope or the limits are for the LRSP, but I was hoping that there could be an objective maybe under goal number 2 that explicitly calls out what transit safety looks like. It's a little bit of a different animal than ped and bike safety, in that when transit's probably generally it's a safe mode of transportation, right? Big burly bus, slow, and people are waiting on the sidewalk to catch it. So the nuances are where the safety issues come into play. And so, can you get on the bus? Is a red curb long enough so that the bus isn't angled in and you have a trip and fall that way? Is the bus stop itself ADA accessible? A lot of the road safety stuff is involved around the bus stop. I mean, access to the bus stop is of course important, and so we don't want people rushing across the street to get to a bus stop in a dangerous condition. And so the location of that bus stop is important too, and then making sure you have the right crosswalks and safety features to get to that point. But I'm hoping that not only we're addressing the access to transit itself, but how the person gets on and off the vehicle and making sure that's also done safely. So I don't know.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, please.
Just making sure that people feel safe waiting for the bus, where they need to wait for it, when they need to wait for it, or arrive back at it at the station, at the stop.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So lighting, you're in a good environment. You're not under
visibility.
Yep, visibility. Yep. The other piece of this is that we all want safer, probably slower streets, but that oftentimes can conflict with transit performance. And so when you're slowing down the streets, say, for road diet or ped bulbs or a bike lane, there oftentimes can be a negative impact to transit, that it slows down transit too. So I just want to make sure that if we look at those types of things, that we're also calling out mitigations to make sure that transit performance is at the very least not negatively impacted. We want to try to at least do no harm, preferably make transit faster and more reliable. I think that's an important thing here, and that's a little bit of a risk that we just have to be aware of when we look at safety projects. That if you're putting in a ped bulb, well, if it's at a bus stop, why don't we put in a bus bulb? Those types of decisions. But there are going to be trade-offs there that we're going to have to understand. I hope that the plan makes light of that.
Okay. Commissioner Graham, with an actual virtual hand up.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I was going to make the comment that I think that's like there's the traffic safety and then there's the perception of safety, or which I think is related to some of the design features. And, I think when I hear safety, like on transit, like through a BART perspective, it means something different from a roadway. So I think both are important, but some are backed up by the data, right? And others are more from the public that will get that. And I agree. I think it's important that we give the opportunity to sort of compare both and, especially focus on areas where the two might overlap. And the only other thing I just, not to harbor on this, but Commissioner Del Rosario did speak a little bit about equity. And when Mr. Peterson, you were talking about, sort of dispersing improvements, there's a difference between equity and equality. And I just think that we need to be, as we've talked about this at a previous meeting, but it is not for the Transportation Commission to decide how the city of Albany is going to define equity, and it shouldn't be defined in multiple different spaces. Like there needs to be a different way in which we are, as a community, are figuring out how equity, what benefit, what burdens we have for equity in this community. And then it's not solely based on income. It's not solely based on demographics. It's a pretty nuanced conversation. And I think, and it's not solely just making sure that there's one every 2 blocks, So I think we need to think really strategically. And I think everyone who uses that word needs to think really carefully about what it is that the intent is behind it before we start using it. And if we can't back it up, right? So, that's another sort of, I don't know how much it helps this conversation, because I think it really means that the council needs to take on a bigger conversation about how we're going to, I wholly support like making sure that benefits and burdens are distributed, equally or equitably. Those actually could be two different, never mind. I'm not going to go down there, but my point is that it's not for this. It's not for a local plan to happen in the transportation. It needs to come from somewhere else, and be careful.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I would hope that the goal of this plan is to provide a fairly balanced citywide look that then could be picked up and put into an equity model in order to choose projects and prioritize them, that this could provide data for that. It's absolutely not something that we can do within this process completely, because if you're looking at equity, then I think you have to take into consideration the projects that have been done in the recent past all over town. Maybe not just the recent past. I mean, there's it becomes sort of a larger issue. So I would look for the equity component of the plan to help, as I say, provide data back to a larger equity process. within the city. And Commissioner Graham, I hope that sort of, aligns with your ideas of the fact that we can't make all the decisions about equity without more guidance and a framework. I also want to touch on the ease, and I just have to say that due to forces and constraints outside of our control, this commission has pretty much found that enforcement cannot be a substantial portion of influence in implementing our projects. There's got to be a better way to say that, but I due to the changing nature of public opinion and forces larger than Albany, and staffing and the size of our city, we do not generally expect that enforcement will be a strong component of the projects that we foster in this commission. Unfortunately. I think we all kind of touched on, the sort of the negative data, if I can term that, for fear and uncomfortableness. And I have to say, to add to that, it's not a universal thing. I might be comfortable riding on streets with sharrows, but we had one public commenter tonight who said they definitely don't feel comfortable riding on streets with just sharrows. We're similar age, but obviously different comfort levels. So there's a further variable there. I would be interested in seeing something about discomfort put into the goals that were presented tonight as a draft, because I just didn't see it there, and I'd like it to be explicit. Any other commissioner comments? I'm not seeing any. We're looking forward to this project, and we hope it will be a good lead-in to what we hope will be an ATP update, and we're going to keep challenging you. So thanks for bringing your A game, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the coming months.
Sounds good. Yeah, thank you, commissioners, and I really appreciate your thoughtful comments. I've taken a lot of good notes, so we'll get with Justin. We'll definitely make some revisions. But thank you for your time.
Thank you. With that, we're going to move on to item number 5.2, the proposed red curb at 721 Hillside Avenue. Commissioner Javadal.
Just a quick note, since I live within 1,000 feet, but more than 500 feet, I'm kind of in the optional to participate range. If there's no one else in that situation, I would recuse myself from this one just to avoid any potential appearance of conflict. Not that I think there is any, but in the abundance of caution, I will sit this one out if no one else needs to.
Thank you for that. That sounds reasonable. And maybe walk the dog. Great. Staff?
Thank you. Hold on. I'm sharing my screen. There we go. So item 5.2 is the proposed red curb at 721 Hillside Avenue. Hillside is the uppermost street wrapping around the southern end of Albany Hill. The roadway is 30 feet wide with a 5-foot sidewalk width on either side and no parking strip. It's the most recent access or waste management red curb requests came to this commission a couple years ago was on Gateview, one street to the south and west of Hillside, which has the same overall right-of-way width, but is actually narrower at 24 feet, but did have a cul-de-sac at the end, a wider turnaround. So at Hillside, that's not the case. The roadway ends abruptly. There are several driveways and parking pads at the end of the street, and there's an approximately 5-foot wide additional patch of asphalt where there's no sidewalk next to an undeveloped parcel, sort of on the left, a little bit in from the end there. A couple of 100 feet to the south of that, a section of Hillside is posted with no parking on Thursday for a weekly waste management service. Waste management has had issues with vehicles parked in this area on service day, making it extremely difficult for the vehicles to navigate. They're also limited in being able to return on a different day if service is disrupted due to the 1 day a week parking restrictions. So they've requested that this stretch be red curbed. They did provide a video showing how they used the turnaround. This is facing towards the south. And even with the red zone requires a bit of back and forth for them. Or with the 1 day parking restrictions. So there is a relatively wide sweep of the vehicle, at least on the east side, as it's needing to back up and navigate the turn there.
So like it looked like the 1 day red zone notification signs actually got in the way of the turnaround.
The post in the middle there, I think, is a basketball hoop that was placed. Rather than the posts. The posts are at the end of the stretch there. There isn't a sign in the middle. But that would be an obstacle if we were to do additional signage as a strategy as opposed to the red curb. So the request is to return the existing restricted area. It's approximately 170 feet total curb length to red curb restrictions, prohibiting it at all times. And the interests they conveyed is improving compliance and minimizing disruptions to the service for the block and providing the flexibility for service at other times if an issue does arise again. The fire department also supports the red curb request and conveyed that this would provide greater maneuverability for emergency vehicles when responding to or departing from calls on the block. And with that, the recommendation from staff is to implement the red curb restrictions adjacent to 721 Hillside. And I'll open it up to questions.
Commissioner questions? Commissioner Del Rosario.
Yeah, out of curiosity, the fire engine would do the same maneuver?
No, so the fire engine would likely need to back up the length of Hillside, still would not be able to navigate that maneuver, but they conveyed that if an ambulance went up with the fire truck, a vehicle could pull over, they could, maneuver multiple vehicles or help a vehicle that was, coming the other way, have that space to clear. So it was more the other elements of needing to navigate or access rather than their vehicle being able to, the larger vehicles being able to really do that multi-point turn.
Justin, we're seeing an unrelated document shared. Thanks.
Thank you.
And then my second question is when, so when this is, when the 3-point, or I guess it's 8-point or whatever turning movement isn't possible, the waste management truck is backing up 1,400 feet.
They have tried to make the maneuver when they haven't had the full space and had trouble. I think there's been at least one collision or scrape with one of the parked vehicles. They've communicated that it's happened multiple times. I don't know for sure if they've backed it up or been able to, with great difficulty, use a different segment or what exactly.
Either way, it's very impressive.
Commissioner Graham? Okay. I'm surprised we didn't receive any correspondence on this one, but let's take it to public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have one public comment. Jeremiah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, one good thing about this is, Waste Management can turn around. And I was watching their truck, a big truck, and it kind of looked like a fire truck. And it seems like it could only help the fire department in case of an emergency. So on the map, it looked like you had two reds. They were across the street from each other. They're kind of like parallel. So you're kind of creating a turnaround. That's great. We need a turnaround anyway at the end of a street like that. So how many parking spaces is that going to take away? Are the parking spaces, I think they were 16 or 18 feet. I forget which one it was, 16 or 18. And then I'll kind of a side note right there. I'm not trying to get off topic, but it was on the video, the basketball hoop. It seemed like it was blocking the sidewalk, kind of like ADA, not ADA accessible, the sidewalk down there. And then I was looking at Google Maps, and maybe they could just put the hoop on the wall somewhere. I got a post hole digger. If they want to borrow it, they could put a post hole up there, and then put the basketball hoop like on their yard or something. But that they could still have their basketball hoop, and it would be ADA accessible. So there's a solution. But anyway, sorry to get distracted. But that could only help a truck turnaround or a fire truck turnaround. So it's kind of, Jovendal, he's got good opinions, and I was kind of wondering what he had to say, because this whole recusing yourself because you live in the area, all of a sudden it just clicked. It's kind of too bad, because that's some valuable input. It's kind of like your neighborhood. That's the most valuable information we can possibly get, and the person can't even make a comment, and they got to excuse themselves. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. Well, I would just be interested in what Jovendal had to say, because he might know certain things about the area, pros and cons. So I don't know. Anyway, that's a tough one. But so yeah, I think all in all, it's a great thing, to do this. I'm sorry about any residences. I know there's an empty lot there. I saw the empty lot on the west side, and that's going to be all red. And also they're going to be all red on the east side as well. So, it kind of reduces parking in Albany, but hopefully not too many people have a problem with it.
Thank you. I noticed there are at least two other attendees tonight, and one of them hasn't had a chance to comment yet. And I just want to reiterate that if you have comments on this item, you use the raise your hand function on the screen, or there's a raise your hand selection on the phone Zoom meeting. This is the time to publicly comment on this item to be heard. While we're seeing if that person wants to be heard, I will mention that when somebody recuses himself, it's really meant as a way to avoid undue influence of other commissioners. That person still has the opportunity outside of the meeting to talk with staff and provide their expertise and opinions to staff informally, and then staff can use that information. So fortunately, it doesn't cut people off completely, just removes them from the public process and from speaking with the other commissioners. So seeing that there are no other attendee raised hands, we'll bring it back to the commission and take commissioner comments. Commissioner Del Rosario?
I make a motion that we recommend staff's, or we proceed with staff's recommendation for the additional red curb on each side of the street.
A second.
I have a motion, a second. I have no further discussion. So let's take a roll call vote.
Commissioner Del Rosario,
Yes.
Vice Chair Graham,
Yes.
Chair McCroskey,
Yes.
motion carries.
Thank you. And Commissioner Chavadel is back. Great. I'm glad we had the opportunity to revisit this and adjust as necessary. Things need to be fixed. We need to change it. With that, we're going to move on to item number 5.3, grant applications for county, state, and federal transportation funding.
Thank you, Chair. So this item covers 3 different grant sources that are coming out in relatively quick succession. California Active Transportation Program, the One Bay Area Grant Cycle 3, and the Alameda County Transportation Commission's 2024 Comprehensive Investment Plan. These grants are allocating funds over several fiscal years. The county and regional agencies play various roles with the different programs. It gets a little convoluted. State and federal funding sources for the Active Transportation Program. But then there's a state component as well as a regional component for that grant program. So part of it gets nominated through Metropolitan Transportation Commission and part through a competitive statewide review. The One Bay Area Grant Cycle 3 program has funding that half will be done at the regional level and half will be done through a county nomination process. And so Alameda CTC is folding in that grant program and call for some other funding sources into their comprehensive investment plan, which will include some county sales tax dollars, vehicle registration fee dollars, and clean air funds. Guidance varies some between the different programs, but the focus continues to be on safety, on supporting active transportation infrastructure and mode shift, and supporting areas that are planning for additional housing that's well served by transit. There are changes over the previous cycles that make it a little difficult to gauge our competitiveness at this point. The State Active Transportation Program has released their call, but the other 2 are still in stages of development, but will be on a similar time frame to have applications needing to be submitted by June. UC Village is no longer identified as a disadvantaged community by MTC. The new categorization is referring to it as equity priority communities. This supported some grant applications in the past. There's also no longer a slice of the Active Transportation Program funding reserved for smaller projects that the regional agency did previously, which the Loney Greenway Intersections Project was awarded under. Also, the One Bay Area grant formula hasn't changed, but it's no longer including a target by jurisdiction. The formula goes by housing production, population, as well as affordability and sort of the housing allocation process. The last cycle, we had allocation towards the San Pablo pedestrian improvements, phase 1 project. This current program is not going to have a target by jurisdiction, and they're saying it's not committing or implying a guaranteed share of funding to any county or jurisdiction. So there's going to be a nomination by the county. They're allowed to submit up to 120% of the formula allocation to the county, but there's no commitment to meet that formula or to each jurisdiction within the county. So we've taken a look at the city projects that have been under development that were referenced as in the last CIP update, but that didn't have full funding or were in various stages of development. All except the Pierce Street Park Bikeway are serving Albany's priority development area, which is basically the San Pablo and Solano commercial corridors. The San Pablo and Buchanan Complete Streets project is the most developed, as we had submitted it for funding previously and have phased it out to match the current funding level. There is also potential overlap with the Alameda County Transportation Commission San Pablo Avenue Corridor project with a number of these projects, and we're continuing to coordinate with them as that project development develops, and we're starting to talk about funding as they are also competitive for these same funding sources. They're looking at the San Pablo corridor, so we're needing to coordinate on who's going to apply for these for which set of projects. So we're starting those conversations. The active transportation program call just came out this last week. There's likely overlap, particularly with that project and the Buchanan Marin Bikeway Phase 4 and the Dartmouth bicycle crossing, as they're looking at those intersection crossings as part of their very near-term project. So we've, in reviewing these, we're recommending the San Pablo and Buchanan Complete Streets Phases 2 and 3 with their focus on pedestrian and cyclist crossing improvements on San Pablo and Buchanan. Phase 2 is the Washington Boulevard bicycle crossing of San Pablo at the offset intersection, and Phase 3 addresses the additional intersections from our complete street study and earlier project development. And the Pierce Street Park Bikeway would be the remaining segment of the Pierce Street path that's envisioned in the active transportation plan along the east side of I-80 between Buchanan Street and Cerrito Creek. The city is working on segments on Cleveland Avenue, as the commission's discussed previously, and adjacent to the affordable housing project that's under development at Washington and Cleveland. So this segment would close the gap between there and the segment that's already been constructed along the 500 block of Pierce. We feel that these projects provide a mix of project types and scales for consideration for these funding sources. And while there's additional work needed to assess our competitiveness, coordinate with other agencies, and monitor as the guidance comes out on the ones that haven't been fully released, we are recommending these projects for grant consideration for this funding cycle. Give us time to continue to develop grant applications for these as we gather more information. And with that, I'll open it up for questions and discussion.
Thank you. Commissioner questions? I'm not so. Commissioner Del Rosario.
Yeah, thanks, Justin, for the presentation, and I think those are all the right projects to pick. I did have some questions about whether other projects considered, and particularly Solano Complete Streets came to mind, and just wondering where the status of that project is and if that's eligible for this cycle.
Yeah, so Solano Complete Streets the capital improvement plan identified several next steps for that. One is it did allocate some funding for shorter term improvements, the more temporary or improvements that are accommodate potential future alternatives. The study left open a few questions. So we do have on the books a shorter term project that already has some funding in the CIP towards doing some of that crossing enhancements scale of work. The other next steps were active transportation plan update to revisit are we talking about different facilities for cyclists on Solano? Are we talking about continuing with the current ATPs, focus on parallel routes, as well as looking at where we could demo back and angle parking, and working with Berkeley that's been talking about doing a similar study for the adjacent stretch of Solano. So those were the next steps. So I think we have a shorter term project that we can implement as part of a paving project or as a standalone to get us that first level of improvements. And we don't have a great scope for that next level yet.
Thanks.
Other commissioner questions? Seeing none, let's take this to public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have one public comment. Jeremiah, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. So is this really what's going on? So this is kind of the money that is kind of our budget for the city, possibly. I mean, or these are just these grants. Are these the only grants that we're applying for? I was wondering, let's say hypothetically, school zones need funding. I was wondering if is school zone funding anywhere in these from any of the Measure 49 or any transportation funding? Because I hope maybe there could be some sort of safety funding somehow for signage and crosswalks and speed bumps and this funding somewhere. I'm just kind of looking ahead for possibly school zones need funding. I hope possibly that's incorporated with any of this. And I was just going to suggest that hopefully we could still look for other grants and apply for other grants. So, all right, keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't see any other public comment, requests for public comment, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you for that comment, and let's bring it back to the commission. Commissioner comments. Questions, agreement with the list, disagreement with the list?
There's one hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Sorry. In the corner of my screen, Commissioner Graham.
Sorry, I'm a little bit out of sync with these grants, but do they have to be used for capital or could they be used for planning as well?
At least the active transportation program can be used for non-infrastructure. I think it limits the planning for within disadvantaged communities, but I would have to double check that.
Okay. I guess my only comment is, I'm all for capital investments, but I'll just reiterate that I do think that we need to go back and we have some comprehensive planning to do that's going to fill our future pipeline of projects. And so I would just say, I'm a planner, who knew? And so I'd say that, it's always important to try to find money for planning because it's not as easy. And so I'm not going to say I don't support these grants, but I just would urge you to keep that in your mind as more grant opportunities arise.
Fair enough. Other commissioner comments? Seeing nothing yet, I would ask, does this mean that we're giving up on the idea of grant funds for an ATP in the near future? Or is there some other stream that we're looking at further down the line?
These funds are more geared towards capital. There is a state planning grant program that we've applied to a couple times for ATP. We're also looking at county or local sources for an ATP update as well. So I don't know that we would be looking to these sources for the ATP update.
Okay. Fair
if
enough.
I may just add to that, Mr. Chair, that in the event there isn't a grant fund available for an ATP, that doesn't mean that we wouldn't go ahead and start that process anyhow using the city's operating revenues out of our normal budget allocation. I think that's the thing we see being a priority with or without a grant.
Great. It seems like getting grant money would help smooth the process, but I appreciate the commitment. And I have heard that before. I do understand that. Thank you. Given that, I think these are previously planned projects that are good choices for funding and hopefully would be strong candidates. Commissioner Javanel.
Just sharing a note that in the past, in conversations with Alameda County Transportation Commission about funding the planning phase of projects prior to then applying for capital or design funds for those projects, they have frequently said that we can use our Measure BB direct local distribution funds for that phase of the project and then turn around and seek the grant funding for the further delivery of the project. So I think that we've definitely seen a pattern of that. But the rules with a lot of these grants kind of change from time to time. And so I think it does make sense to keep an eye out for those changes, which obviously Justin is doing. So I think all things considered, this looks like a pretty good recommendation. I'd be happy to move the recommendation.
Let's see if Commissioner Del Rosario has any remaining. No? Okay. Commissioner Javanel, would you like to move or make a recommendation?
I recommend that I move that we approve the staff recommendation.
To City Council.
To City Council, yes.
I'll second.
Commissioner Del Rosario seconds. Any further discussion? Mr. Freed, could you take a roll vote?
Commissioner Del Rosario.
Aye.
Commissioner Javandal.
Aye.
Vice Chair Graham.
Aye.
Chair McCroskey.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great. Thank you. With that, we'll move on to item number 5.4, the expenditure of sugar-sweetened beverage tax proceeds. I think we've all been through this process at least once now.
There we go. Thank you, Chair. So this is a voter-approved ordinance that established a tax on 1% per fluid ounce on distributing sugar-sweetened beverages. It is general fund revenue, and the aim is to apply towards specific purposes related to health and well-being. It's estimated $260,000 in tax proceeds will come in fiscal year 2023. Prior years, the commissions requested the prior program cost information, which I'm providing here. 3 programs that the commission recommended and that have been funded over several years include the school crossing guard program, the bike safety program, and Healthy Me Music and Movement. If the commission were to recommend those 3 programs, and the balance after those would be approximately $70,000. In others, there were a few other more programmatic recommendations last year that were implemented with the program budget that didn't come out of the Transportation Commission recommendation. And following previous years' request to come with some staff recommendations on what that balance could be applied towards, we do see a continued need for sidewalk shaving, which was our recommendation last year. It's a minimal impact maintenance program that reduces trip hazards and encourages mobility by non-motorized transport, and it extends the life of decent sidewalk that doesn't need full reconstruction, and it would speed up an existing program that we have. The other recommendation this year is for the bike path adjacent to the affordable housing site. So in our agreement with the housing developer, they are accommodating the route for the path on the site, and we are looking to have them design that, and if the city contributes the funding for the additional improvements beyond their project, they would build it as part of their site work. The current estimate for that work that we've received is $61,000. That isn't going to be the final budget for this, but that's the latest estimate we've gotten. And so that, given the nexus with the intent of the affordable housing provided next door with the adjacency of the park and the active transportation facility this would be, I think there's a good nexus with the intent of the sugar-sweetened beverage tax. So we're also recommending that as a potential project. And with that, I'd open up to questions.
Great. Commissioner questions. I see Commissioner Graham.
I'm sorry, where is the housing bike path?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so this is part of the Pierce Street path connection. Currently, there's a path on the 500 block of Pierce on the west side. This path would be where we discussed the Cleveland Avenue on-street segment of a bike connection down to Buchanan. This would be that next piece at the Washington and Cleveland intersection, the northeast corner, which is down the hill from the Pierce Street Park. That is the site of an affordable housing development project. And the Pierce Street path envisioned connection comes through that site. And so they've designed how that path can be accommodated with the housing development.
So it's a further piece of the connection. It's not the complete connection.
This would be the piece that's on the development site. Yeah.
Great.
So would be.
Hold on, sorry. What is the corner of the affordable housing project? It's the Washington and Cleveland?
The northeast corner of Washington and Cleveland.
Okay. Thank you.
I see a hand from Commissioner Del Rosario.
Thanks. How does the sidewalk shaving fit in with the sidewalk repair program? Is it take the other spectrum where they don't qualify for repairs and try to fix those?
It's in conjunction with that. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head whether it's funded through that but the sidewalk repairs, places that we have to reconstruct the sidewalk that have I think we talked through the review criteria previously. This one, the last iteration was looking at places where it was the smaller that just shaving could correct a tripping hazard or small deviation. And the last iteration was focused on the ATP network and adjacency to the Solano commercial corridor.
Okay. Thanks.
Other commissioner questions? Commissioner Graham.
Sorry, I'm still catching up. That path, though, would just be on the parcel with the affordable housing, or would it be the whole path through Pierce Street Park to connect up to Pierce Street? You know, I have a fondness for this specific piece of bike lane.
So this 61,000 would be towards building the path on the development site. The discussion from the last item of applying for a grant would be for the piece uphill from the site through Pierce Street Park and connecting to the 500 block.
But if we didn't get the grant and we did fund this, like right now, you can't get from that corner to Pierce Street Park. Would it at least be open as an accessible path to the park from that location? Or would we, I mean, there's a fence there. I mean,
yeah, we've discussed through that as part of the development site. If they were to build it with their construction, it would stay as part of their maintained, and they would fence it off until we could connect to it and connect it to the park. While it doesn't have anywhere that it's connecting to, we would not make it an open pathway.
So it wouldn't even
disappointing.
Yeah, I'm sorry to break in. So it wouldn't even allow the residents of the development to access Pierce Street Park?
That's for them to decide if they put an access gate in. That's not really, I think, something that we would require of them or can require. We have it so that there's a construction, easement for us to be able to build the path, and that we would take over the maintenance of it and take it on as a public pathway once there's somewhere for it to connect to.
Okay. Commissioner Graham, were you going to? No. Okay.
Oh, no, it's just, I mean, I get it. It's just not really that great of a solution because it could just work as a public access. You know, you can't ride a bike on it. You could still walk on it and access the park, right? I mean, I know it's not accessible, but there still is an accessible entry to the park. So
the piece that the 60,000 would build would not connect all the way up to the park. It wouldn't just be a matter of opening a gate. They're building the piece that's on their parcel, and there's going to be additional grading and continuing of the path through the southern end of the park to bring it up to the elevation.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Thanks for that
sharing
clarification. Yeah. Other questions?
If the commission is still wondering about that, I can share my screen to show you the concept of what is included and not included in that potential 61,000.
That'd be great.
So this is kind of a complex plan. You can ignore the parts of the details of the building. This is Cleveland down here at the bottom, Washington on the right-hand side of the screen. So the left-hand side of the screen is to the north. So what we're talking about is just this segment here on what will be their leased property, that we think it makes sense to construct that while the rest of the project is under construction. There's still considerably more work to be done up here to connect it into the future full connection going north all the way to Pierce Street. So it's just it's what we're trying to capture with this is the construction efficiencies and avoid the disruption of construction in the future construction immediately next to the building. And then the rest of the connection would occur as it can be developed by the city as a capital improvement project. And I should point out the park itself is up here in the top left corner.
Great. And we have this other project on Cleveland Avenue. And so would some kind of connection across Cleveland wait for the Pierce Street Park component, or if this portion is going to be closed, or I'm not sure about the integration there.
We haven't gotten their next round of civil improvements, but we did have elements of the connection out of where they're bringing their fire emergency pad and the bike path to Cleveland and how that interfaces.
Right, separate issue. Okay, thank you. Any further commissioner questions at this point? Seeing none, let's turn it over to public comment. I know we have at least one commenter.
Yes, Jeremiah, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. You know, the map that you showed on the screen just now, I don't know, I think it might have confused me, but the Cleveland Park, I was thinking we're talking about the western part of Pierce Street on the top of the hill, kind of going down toward Pierce Street Park. Is it Pierce Street Park or is it Peggy Thompson Park? Are they both the same thing? I hope I'm not confusing Pierce Street Park with Cerrito Park down by the creek. Anyway, you know, so this is how we're recommending to use money from the Sugar-Sweetened Beverage Tax Fund. And these are projects to fund using money from money that was in a general fund, but aimed for the purpose of, what was it, education and health. I mean, I guess it's encouraging health because we're trying to get people to walk more by making sidewalks so they can walk. I mean, is this coming from the $72,000 remaining, or is this kind of a little bit from each of those three? I mean, these are great projects, and I know doing something around Pierce Street. A lot of people live around there, and a lot of people live down at the 555 and all these other numbers on Pierce Street, and people are paying a lot of taxes. You know, it'd be kind of nice to show good faith to the community, you know, that we're doing something around their neighborhood. You know, at least we got construction going on, some sort of sidewalk or some sort of bike path or pedestrian path. You know, that way our community can see that Albany's working on something, even though it may not lead all the way to the park. It might not be 100% ADA accessible yet, you know, or bike friendly yet, but it's in the works. You know, it's on the work plan, and it's on the master plan, and it's a work in progress, but at least we're working on it. So it's a tough call. You know, I hope this money was going to be used for putting water stations on the Ohlone Greenway. You could stop riding your bike and get water or something. But I don't know. Keep up the good work.
Thank you for your comment. Seeing no further public comments, I'm going to bring it back to the commission. And in response to the public comment, I think we've tried to make it as clear as possible, but one more time, this is a proposed path, partial path starting along Cleveland Avenue, just north of Washington Avenue, that will skirt the housing development proposed there and go up the hill part of the way to Pierce Street Park and only be opened at the time that the pathway is completed all the way through the park. Great. So we have several suggestions, and perhaps, Mr. Freed, perhaps we could return to your slide of the past and present proposals. Let's start with the past history. If anybody wants to start talking, take commissioner comments. You've gone small again on my screen, so if you could use the hands, that would be a help. Great, and just briefly, let's switch to the next slide. So the affordable housing project bike path at 61,000 and sidewalk shaping at 50. And now let's switch back to the previous slide. Great, Commissioner Graham.
I guess I'm in support of using what's shown up here to continue these commitments for the next fiscal year. I guess when it comes to the remaining balance, I think that we should take the opportunity of the economies of scale to build the bike path in hopes that we get the grant and can be ready to use when we can get the bike path in there. It seems like there's benefit to doing it now than letting it wait till the latter. Sometimes things just don't ever get done. So that's my personal opinion.
Great. Other comments? Commissioner Javandal.
Thank you. I certainly would support continuing the expenditures on the programs listed on this slide. Because the bike path connecting to Pierce Street Park is between 500 and 1,000 feet from my house, I'm not going to comment on that one. So if we can just divide the vote, I will recuse myself from the expenditure of the 72,500 balance, but I would like to support these three programs.
Great. Thank you for that note. Commissioner Del Rosario.
No, I'm good with Commissioner Graham's recommendation. So happy to vote on that if that comes up as a motion.
Okay. And in general, I am supportive of the first two items on this list and the addition of the 61,000 bike path. But if the majority are interested in the healthy main music, I won't vote against that. Given our constraints with Commissioner Javandal's recusal, can we have two different motions unless there's any further discussion? Hearing none, who would like to make a first proposal? Commissioner Javandal.
I would move that we approve the recommendation to council of the listed amounts for the school crossing guards program, the safe routes to school bike education, and the healthy me music and movement program.
Second.
Commissioner Graham seconds. Any further discussion? Mr. Freed, could you take a roll vote, please?
Commissioner Del Rosario.
Aye.
Commissioner Javindal,
Aye.
Vice Chair Graham,
Aye.
Chair McCroskey.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great. Can I get a second motion?
I'll make a motion that we use the, sorry, can you go to the next slide, the remaining balance to fund the affordable housing project bike path for $61,000.
I'll second.
Del Rosario seconds. A voice vote, please.
Commissioner Del Rosario.
Aye.
Vice Chair Graham,
Aye.
Chair McCroskey.
Aye. And he's taking himself off of active, but Commissioner Jamadal abstains. And he has nodded in acceptance of that.
Yes, thank you. I abstain.
Not twisting his arm. Great.
Motion carries.
Thank you. And thanks for those concrete suggestions. That was very helpful. Let's
Agreed.
move on to item 5.5, the San Pablo Avenue specific plan update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a PowerPoint. This is just a quick status report and update for you. You've discussed this in the past, and I wanted you to know that there is a first draft of the specific plan now available. It was attached to your agenda. There's still some work to be done on this, and in your previous discussions, you've talked about TDA programs and cargo bike parking and level of service analysis for transit, and acknowledge that that's work that still needs to be done to be incorporated into what would probably be the final draft in the next couple of months. We did have an initial study session on this with this Planning and Zoning Commission a few weeks ago, and then with the City Council on Monday, and getting lots of feedback from them as well. It's ultimately going to help support the city's preparation of the housing element portion of our general plan, and it's really focused in on the zoning standards of heights and setbacks and densities and so forth that are contained in the planning and zoning code. It's not intended to be an improvement plan for public improvements. It does acknowledge that, and it's something that's analyzed, but its primary focus is on the zoning code and development on private property. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, elaborate on anything that you're particularly interested in.
And it looks like you're taking comments as well, according to the agenda.
Yes, of course.
Great. Any questions? Seeing none from the commission, I will turn it over to questions from the public, and there's at least one.
Jeremiah, please go ahead.
Hi. Wow, what a current topic. This is so great. I'm so thankful to get to make a comment on this, because everywhere else, it's just, there's a separation between all the buildings and the residences and the commercial that gets built on San Pablo with the whole housing element. And well, when it comes to parking, this is where it's at. So all these people have comments about parking. Well, this is the time right here. And I only got 2.5 minutes left. So regarding, parking on San Pablo, we're going to be building a lot of houses, a lot of units. So here's my idea. Whenever I hear of parking from now on in Albany, whether it's parking on this committee or this commission or city council, whenever I think of parking from now on, I think of electric car charging parking. because just a normal parking space, to me, it's getting outdated. And when I'm talking parking, I'm talking electric charging parking spot. So when we're talking about parking on San Pablo, we only have so many spaces on San Pablo forever. And whether it's 16 feet or 18 feet, and you know, if I got to get out there again, just let me borrow the Rolly measuring thing and some of those forms, the blank forms, and I'll go measure, I'll count parking spaces on San Pablo. You know, the one with the blank form with all the blocks. And I'll just write it in. I'll write the names of streets and everything. And I'll turn it back in. You know, because it's a big deal. These houses are going to be built 6-story, 7, 8-story, I don't know. But there's no parking requirements anymore. I don't know who's in charge of making all those decisions, but parking is going to be such a minimum thing in 15, 20 years from now. Parking is going to be such a valuable commodity. Right now, there's all these empty spaces, but there's not. Everybody's going to have an electric car in the future. So hopefully somewhere in this plan, we could develop electric car charging parking spaces on San Pablo, at least an ADA one to start. Thanks.
Thank you for that comment. Seeing no other public comment, I will bring it back to the commission. Nobody's jumping in. Oh, Commissioner Del Rosario.
Waited out to the last minute. I did review. I unfortunately did not review the entire document, but I did review the transportation section of the plan, of the draft plan, and maybe there's more a question, but it's also a comment about the parking limitations. I think it's great that there are incentives to reduce the parking minimums if the developer can achieve certain things such as transit passes and bike parking. I was wondering and also commenting that it seems like we could be one more step aggressive on this, and rather than incentivizing, then we just mandate it and we just say your parking minimums are this, or you have no parking minimums, even going to maximums, and then you shall do these things. I don't know what the market, how the market reacts to those types of things, but I think in adjacent cities it's done okay. So, I do think that we could just be more aggressive about making all of those things a requirement. Oh, one other thing, sorry. Under travel choices and the guiding principles, I think we should remove driving.
Excuse me, remove
driving. I think driving was mentioned as a mode of transportation.
I haven't read that section, I have to say, but it seems a little odd to just remove driving. Can you be a little more explicit about why you think that's a good idea?
It talks about travel choices of all the different modes. And yeah, there's zero emission vehicles, much as the public comment had mentioned. But I think in terms of prioritizing different modes of transportation that would best be served under these developments, I think we should just leave our focus on bike, ped, and transit.
I understand your thrust there, at least partially. Yeah. Thank you. Commissioner Giovanni.
So I think my comment is around the bike parking requirement, which I think is great to have. And hopefully we can clarify that it be at grade. You don't have to go up and down stairs or elevators, and sized adequately for large bikes. I think there was a reference to charging for electric bikes. Absolutely support that, but just recognizing that bikes come in a variety of shapes and sizes, and things like automatic doors can make a huge difference in your ability to get to that secure bike parking. And I forget if it said secure, but absolutely secure is, in my mind, assumed for an on-site bike parking for housing.
There is at least one four-wheel 2x2 Surrey that lives in Albany. I'm not suggesting that the parking would necessarily have to fit that, but they do come in all sizes and shapes.
Yep. And I think part of the reason I mention that is with more and more e-bikes of a variety of levels of functionality, they start to come a lot closer to replacing automobiles as a form factor for people's mobility needs. So even electric cars may not be as necessary if you've got an electric bike.
In a transit-rich environment like San Pablo Avenue.
Absolutely.
If I can add.
Thank you.
Commissioner Graham.
You got me. I'll just uplift the comments before I agree with them. I also support parking maximums, and I do think that it's pretty clear that the market can support that because we are seeing it in El Cerrito. So just throw that out there. I think you knew that, Commissioner Del Rosario. Just being coy. So that's all.
Great. I too agree with what's been said for the most part, and I'm in favor of eliminating parking minimums, of making mandatory alternative travel support on an ongoing basis. Sizes of bicycles. The Surrey has a little fringe. I'm going to start singing in a minute. I'm sorry. I'll stop. And also I'll pick up on the public comment. And I think requiring all larger vehicle parking to be electric charging ready, if not capable, is key. When the bowling alley project was going on, they have these machines that sort of jukebox cars that they were talking about putting in the garages. And even those apparently are electric car ready, or hopefully are. They said they were. That's encouraging. That's about all I have. Any further comments from commissioners?
Well, Chair McCroskey, if I may just report back that the Planning Commission, when they reviewed this draft, had much the same comment with respect to parking. As you might expect, there's a spectrum of views about it in the community and on the commission, but I think the kind of my sense of the middle, where people were landing in the middle, was a zero parking minimum requirement, eliminated requirement, and a maximum of one parking space, and essentially the marketplace, the development economics, the developer can come in with some number in between. And I don't remember exactly the number for the bowling alley, but I wanted to say it's something like 7/10 of a parking space per unit, something in that territory. I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the exact number. I should have that. But
thank you. I want to add on the conversely, I think a minimum amount of parking for biking of some number above one bike per unit. I don't know what's appropriate there, and I'd like to reinforce what Commissioner Javadal said about level entry, and having seen some other plans, I would also say ease of access to the local bike appropriate egress. You don't want to exit on the side opposite the best bike route, and you don't want to have to wind your bike through narrow corridors to the middle of the development. that kind of thing. I know that's hard to regulate, and probably will come up in plans going forward. Commissioner Del Rosario.
Yeah, thanks. Just as a follow-up to Jeff's comment of what he heard from the Planning Commission, what would that mean for the incentives, and how would those then be addressed if we change to a different type of parking policy? It seems like we'd want to keep pushing those incentives to be there.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one we're mulling over, because we're kind of moving some of these incentives into requirements, and how those are going to be applied. We kind of need to think through. I don't have a good answer for you. I think it's the right question to ask, and we're asking it to ourselves right now.
Great. So if there are no further comments, and seeing none, we'll close this item. Thank you very much for the report and keeping us informed and the opportunity to make comments. Much appreciated. I would like to move on to item number 6, announcements. And Mr. Freed, if it's okay with you, I'm bubbling over because I've been transiting on Lower Marin between San Pablo and Masonic, and I'm really excited to see the cutting down and removal of the telephone poles, which are one of the last vestiges of the project that began many, many years ago to underground and further improve that section of Marin. And it's beautiful to be able to look out and see the sky unhindered. And so I'll let you take it from there.
Yes, so that project is underway. It went out in the construction alerts a couple weeks ago. The other project that's active right now is the Washington Avenue Pavement Rehab Phase 2, which is the San Pablo to Masonic stretch. And it's the portion that we saved to come in after East Bay Mud completed their work through there. So that work should be completed in April.
I'm sorry?
That work should be completed in April.
I'm sorry, I missed the last word.
April.
Thank you. Great. Any other announcements from the commission? Okay. Future agenda items. This is an item where we don't take public comment. Do we have future agenda items already planned that we can expect, Mr. Freed?
We are working away on the outdoor dining long-term parklet program and are working to have that back to you.
Great.
Hopefully next month.
Do we have requests for future agenda items from commissioners? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on and note that our next meeting is Thursday, April 28th at 7 p.m. As far as we know, that will be a virtual meeting.
Not sure.
Not sure. Ooh.
Depends on the timing of the governor's releasing the state of emergency. Some agencies are going into hybrid meetings, and there's a possibility that we would need to do that. In which case, commissioners would need to be present in the council chambers, like the good old days. We're working on the technology for members of the public to have a choice of either being in the council chambers or using Zoom.
Great.
So stay tuned, but we might, if not this meeting, in the next month or two, be back into, for you folks to be physically present in the building.
So if you get that $400 gas card, that means that you will need to be at the next meeting. Right. With that, oblique bit of humor, we will adjourn for tonight. Thank you all, both commissioners, staff, and public, for participating, and stay safe on the roads.